a North-South dialogue, because the South is not completely outweighed and outvoted by the North in the composition of the G20. Now, the summit in Pittsburgh took a concrete decision to reform the financial institutions. There are going to be mechanisms for G20 experts to address regulatory reform, but there's also talk of shifting decision-making power within these organizations. A decision to shift 5% of the IMF quota share and 3% of the World Bank's voting power from the developed world to the developing and transition economies. Now, this actually falls short of what India, along with Brazil, Russia, and China, the so-called BRIC, have called for. BRIC has called for 7% of the IMF quota share, not 5%, and 6% of the World Bank's voting powers, not 3%, to be transferred. But at least it's a beginning. And our objective, frankly, in the longer term, is broad parity between the developed countries and the developing and transition economies, and so we see this only as a first step. Now, if that seems contestable to some people in the West, I think we can only point to the recent global financial crisis, which showed how important it is that the surveillance of risk by international institutions, early warning mechanisms, and so on, are needed for all. In other words, they are needed so that the developing countries can also have some oversight over the mistakes the developed countries are making as well. It's important that in this context, the developing countries should have a voice in overseeing the global financial performance of all countries, rather than it simply being a case of the rich supervising the economic delinquency of the poor, which has been the pattern of much of the last 65 years of international global governance. So the inclusion of developing countries in the oversight mechanisms and the inclusion of developed countries in the mechanisms that need to be overseen is essential as well. And to that I might add en passant the need for multilateral and regional development banks to have additional and adequate resources to fulfill their mandates. There's never good governance without good resources. Now, the need for increased, more democratic and more equitable global governance therefore cannot be denied. Jobs anywhere in the world today depend not only on local firms and factories, but on faraway markets for the goods they consume and produce, on licenses and access from foreign governments, on international financial trade rules that ensure the free movement of goods and persons, and on international financial institutions that ensure stability. In short, on the international system first constructed in 1945. We just have to bring them into the world of 2010. Our globalizing world clearly needs institutions and standards, not global governments for which there is little political support anywhere, but global governance built on laws and norms that countries negotiate together and agree to uphold as the common rules of the road. India is committed to a world in which sovereign states can come together to share burdens, address common problems, and seize common opportunities. If we are determined to live in a world governed by common rules and shared values, and to strengthen and reform the multilateral institutions that the enlightened leaders of the last century have bequeathed to us, then only can we fulfill the continuing adventure of making this century better than the last. At the same time, much of what we are in the process of accomplishing at home, to pull our people out of poverty and to develop our nation, enables us to contribute to a better world. This is a value in itself, and it's also in our fundamental national interest. A world that is peaceful and prosperous, where trade is free and universally agreed principles are observed, and in which democracy and respect for human rights flourish, is a world of opportunity for India and for Indians to thrive. As you know, we in India come from a very long tradition of internationalism or universalism. The old Sanskrit saying, Vasudevaya Kutumbakam, the whole world is one family, has animated India's approach since time immemorial on the global stage. We have never been an insular, internally focused country. We have always had an external focus. Even at the moment of independence in 1947, that midnight moment when the flames of partition with Pakistan were burning, our great first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, was still able to speak not only of his dreams for India, but for the world. In his historic speech about India's tryst with destiny, Nehruji, speaking of our country's hopes, said, and I quote, "Those dreams are for India, but they are also for the world. For all the nations and peoples are too closely knit together today for any one of them to imagine that it can live apart. Peace has been said to be indivisible, so is freedom, so is prosperity now, and so also is disaster in this one world that can no longer be split into isolated fragments, unquote. 63 years ago, he said that. So we see ourselves very consciously as a responsible international citizen seeking to help fulfill those dreams for the world. On that basis, we wish to see a world that is more equitable, that allows more voices to be heard, that allows more players to have a part in that classic spirit of Vasudevaya Kutumbakam, that we are all one family, and we have to sort out that family's business together. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.